Hey guys, Evan here, host of Locked On Cavs. Just giving you a quick note that prior to Cavs Media Day, I hopped on with Locked On Knicks co-host for like the zillionth time, Alex Wolf, to talk about the upcoming season for the Cavaliers and the New York Knicks, and also after the Milwaukee Bucks got Damian Lillard, and we recorded this before Drew Holiday joined the Boston Celtics, but before that, possible speculation of Donovan Mitchell popping back up in trade rumors. Check it out. Be sure to tune in. Chris and I will be back Tuesday morning to talk more about Cavs Media Day and our takeaways from it, including a number 12 Tristan Thompson.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
All right, it's Knicks Cavs crossover time for like the fifth time this offseason. It's dating back to the playoffs too. But there's been a lot to talk about between these two teams. I'm joined by Evan Dammerel of the Locked On Cavs podcast, and we are going to talk about Damian Lillard first off. So about neither of our teams. It was kind of the biggest. We're recording this on Wednesday. It was the biggest news of the week. Biggest news of the offseason, probably, I would say. I don't think that's unreasonable to say so far. And so we obviously get this huge deal. We got the Woj bomb finally that everybody's been begging for, much to the Miami fans' chagrin that were in his comments for months. It was not to announce him to Miami. Damian Lillard goes to Milwaukee as part of a 3-team trade. Drew Holiday, DeAndre Ayton, Toumani Camara, and a first-round pick and 2 swaps from Milwaukee go to the Blazers, and then Phoenix gets Yusuf Nurkic, Grayson Allen, Nas Little, and Keon Johnson in this deal. Evan, I guess first, what were like few sentence thoughts on this deal, like from the Cavs' perspective and just overall?
So the Cavs have the luxury of facing Damian Lillard and the Milwaukee Bucks 4 times this upcoming season. And funnily enough, we were talking about this on Locked On Cavs. We were going through FanDuel lines and odds just for like who could win the conference, who could win the division, etc. And awards too. And I just said, hey, Chris, quick sidebar, how much would this change if Damian Lillard ended up with the Bucks? And then we both mutually agreed, that's a 2K trade. It's not going to happen. It's probably going to be the Heat. And then Chris said, I think it might be the Raptors. And I said, yeah, but what if that Bucks team's going to be unstoppable? And on offense, they are menacingly scary. And I'm very curious to see how teams diffuse them. But hey, good on Milwaukee. They listened to their superstar saying that he wanted to get better, and they certainly went out and got better. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I feel pretty similar. I mean, luckily the Knicks don't have to face the Bucks quite as much, although I think they faced them 3 times this year, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to go back and look at the schedule. Seems like a team that the Knicks just always end up facing 3 times every year, regardless of how the schedule breaks down. But I'm kind of I think they're going to be really, really nasty, from the perspective of both our teams being kind of Eastern Conference up and comers, getting ready to hopefully enter contention, serious contention, if they can swing it. If players keep improving, if Mobley and Allen get better for the Cavs, and if the Knicks young players keep developing along with Brunson and Randall, there were real aspirations of maybe the Bucks will kind of fall apart soon, and the Celtics maybe will fall apart thanks to contracts and stuff in a year or two, and and the Heat will just run out of juice finally, and then our teams could potentially be up there, and having some fun up top. And now it just kind of seems any pipe dreams of that for the next couple years don't seem super realistic, because I just think this combo is going to be lethal. I mean, it just literally all the problems that you have with having Giannis as your centerpiece of your team go away by having Lillard there, because he can just space the floor so well. He can create for himself anywhere on the court. So if you run into those situations where it's the other team is walling off the paint and Giannis can't get all the way to the hoop, which is his bread and butter, then all of a sudden you have Damian Lillard just waiting outside who can hit it from anywhere on the court. He's basically, his range is second only to Steph Curry, and accuracy and everything else. And, a guy coming off a 30-point per game season last year. It's nonsense. As far as the Knicks too, the other thing is this kind of changes things on the Giannis front. which we'll get to in our third segment, where we're going to sort of revisit Donovan Mitchell, the Donovan Mitchell saga, and if there could be a Mitchell 2.0 saga. But I think for the Knicks here, this is there's been so much chatter the last like 3-4 weeks about like Giannis might want out in a couple of years, and he really put the screws to Milwaukee, like you said, and then they went ahead and made this move. And like from a Knicks perspective now, it's sort of like, in a way, it's almost a relief, because I think now you could say, all right, don't worry about holding these chips back for a guy, for Giannis specifically, because I think it's pretty safe to say that as long as Lillard is there, they're probably going to continue trying to go for it, because that's just a really, really talented team with those two as the top two stars.
I mean, I will say it is a shame for the New York Knicks, New York City, like coffee cup crossover for a Greek theme just to attract Giannis in terms of city edition jerseys. But on top of that, yeah, it's fascinating because the Knicks are an up and coming team. You and I have talked about this a lot. The Cavs are an up and coming team. And when you look at the Bucks, you're like, okay, both Cleveland and New York and possibly Boston as well, depending on how, like, the two Jays are young enough like that you can build around that quite a bit. But like you can age out a team like Boston, or sorry, not Boston, Milwaukee, and then it may be like you usurp them and take that number 2 spot, or maybe you pass Boston as well and become the number 1 team in the Eastern Conference. But to your point, this just opened up Milwaukee's runway quite a bit again, because with Giannis as your centerpiece, you can run pick and roll Dame Giannis all the time and just watch Giannis with a full head of steam crash to the basket and just get like easy looks, because defenses are going to either have to like respect Dame, or you see Dame get a wide open look because defenses have to respect Giannis at the same time. The geometry that the Bucks can work with now on offense is just absolutely nutty to conceive, because then you have like Chris Middleton as like your third banana on the perimeter too, or your third star really in this offense, who works really well too. And then even on the defensive side of the ball, like, sure, Milwaukee took a pretty decent downgrade by giving Drew Holiday to Portland to acquire Damian Lillard. But even if you have Lillard being attacked on defense, you still have that backline of Giannis and Lopez, where it's going to be really hard to score on the Bucks at times too. And sure, there's pressure points to maybe attack the Bucks that way. Like if you get their stars into foul trouble and exploit maybe their lack of depth off the bench, that can make life a little bit easier if you're an opposing team. But it's so tricky to think about, just because, yeah, like the Giannis thing was fascinating because the comments are pretty clear. And then you could see like, okay, well, if a team strikes out on Dame, like whether it was Miami, or let's say Miami did get Dame, like if Giannis is not happy with the situation, like the Knicks could be circling and give like a really overwhelming offer, because they've kept the powder pretty dry after trading Kristaps Porzingis to Dallas and just slowly accumulating assets over time just to kind of maybe make a big splashy move like that. And yeah, I'm curious to see what a team like New York or even Cleveland, who made their power move, does to now hang with the team who brought a nuclear warhead to a gunfight.
Yeah, I mean, I don't envy being in the same division as them, because having to face them 4 times is pretty tough. To your point, I just think I think the biggest thing to me is the like what you said, the pick and roll. It's just nasty. It's just, you're dealing with one of the most dominant finishers and foul drawers in NBA history, and one of the most dominant shooters in NBA history. And there's just no way to properly defend that unless you're going to start like sending an extra defender to help guard pick and roll. But they still have enough weapons around to exploit you. Like you're still going to have Brook Lopez out on the perimeter who can shoot the 3. You know, they didn't completely gut their team to make this happen. You know what I mean? It was essentially trading Holiday, and then like Grayson Allen was a great role player for them, but like they've still got Malik Beasley that they just added. You know, they have Bobby Portis still on the team. They still have Connaughton. They have Chris Middleton, obviously, who we didn't even talk about yet. Like if he could stay healthy, like things are nasty. Like they just have so many shooters. They're basically the perfectly built team around these 2 centerpieces now at this point. So it's scary times for our 2 teams.
It is scary times. And I guess if there's a ray of optimism, if you're a Cavs fan, I told my co-host this, but like pre-draft analysis and where they are as players now, like if you really want to see what the apex of building around like Darius Garland and Evan Mobley could be. Maybe there are some notes the Cavs could take from what the Bucks did with Dame and Giannis now, and just like adding shooting or adding a stretchy big man because your power forward just isn't a reliable 3-point shooting threat, and he needs that space to operate down low, but he just gives you so much on defense and other little things on offense. And Garland is the type of guy who has the range. He doesn't have that selfish edge maybe sometimes where Dame has, where like Dame's perfectly comfortable taking a heat check just to completely break the back for the 5th time of a team. And then maybe that's something that grows over time. But yeah, to your point, like Milwaukee did lose Grayson Allen, who was their starting 2 guard, and Middleton is their starting 3, but he's still there. So you would assume Pat Connaughton becomes the starting 2, but then you still have Malik Beasley. You have Jay Crowder, Bobby Portis. Maybe they go take a stab at Gary Payton because or not Gary Payton. I'm sorry. I'm blanking on this one. We'll just I'll remember the name in a second. But the Bucks have the luxury of creating some roster spots by trading 2 players to get 1, and maybe they go get 1 more player. Campaign is who I was thinking of, and maybe they'll get like Campaign just to round out the back end of the rotation, and then they're kind of complete as a team. But this is a very top-heavy team, but that's a good problem to have if you're the Bucks. Like, they're just very good on both ends of the floor, and I wonder how they evolve. I think there are going to be growing pains no matter what when you're adding a superstar like Damian Lillard, especially with a rookie coach running the show. But the Bucks are primed to win the championship this year. Not even just win the conference, but like just outright win the championship.
Hey guys, Evan here real quick. Got to pay the bills, so I want to give you a quick word from today's sponsor, Game Time. It's really hard to buy tickets these days, especially with how expensive they are and just with the economy feeling tighter and tighter. And especially if you want to go to a last minute event because your night frees up, it's a little harder now. But thanks to today's sponsor, Game Time, life's a lot easier. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets, and they have deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last minute seats. With zone deals, you can pick the section and Game Time picks the seats for an average of 18% savings as well. What a deal. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
All right, and we're back in to continue. Well, I shouldn't say continue talking Knicks Cavs. To start talking Knicks Cavs after we talked Bucks in the first segment, we talked about what the Bucks trade means to the Knicks and Cavs a little bit, which again we'll talk about a little in our final segment as well when we talk about if maybe there's now a door open to potentially revisit the Donovan Mitchell saga, should he be steadfast in not signing an extension. But as of right now, let's put on our rose-colored glasses, or maybe not rose-colored glasses. I don't know. If you were going to rank the Cavs' chances, let's not even say a finals berth. Let's just say to make an Eastern Conference Finals in the next 3 seasons on a scale of 1 to 10. Or you can make it percentage points, 0 to 100%. Where are you putting the odds, you think, on that?
Within the next 3 years, I want to say it's maybe a 7 or 8. It obviously depends on how things break. It depends on how things go for the Bucks and the Sixers as well. And then the Heat, like there's a clear, and the Celtics too, like there's a clear upper echelon. You have Milwaukee, and then Boston is pretty close to them, I'd say, in terms of talent and just how good they are as a team. And then you have like this just pretty thick group of Philly, Miami, New York, Cleveland. I think Atlanta could be in that conversation too if they improve with this Quinn Snyder having a full training camp and everything, and some of the offseason moves they made as well. But it's going to be interesting to see because, like, if you look at like FanDuel, a regular sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network, like heading into next season, the Cavs are plus 700 to win the conference, and the Knicks are plus 1600. And I am surprised by that because considering how last season went between both of these teams, with the Knicks just mopping Cleveland in 5 games, that You really are banking on the potential of Evan Mobley and Darius Garland like leveling up in such a dramatic way that they are your cornerstones, and maybe that is just like a contingency plan and a bit of a security blanket in the event Donovan Mitchell does leave, whether it's to join the Knicks or it's via trade with another team or in free agency. So I don't know. Like I want to say like 70-80% because you just don't know how things will break and evolve. But Cleveland is one of those interesting teams where they've made their power move. And Miami's just an odd team to begin with, but they're always in the mix for somebody. But like Philly has an asset in James Harden that they could work with. New York, as I mentioned before, has a ton of assets to work with to make a dramatic move if they want to. So Cleveland is kind of maybe not sitting twiddling their thumbs waiting to see what happens to everyone else, but I think they're kind of waiting to see what does our internal development look like, you know? But what is your confidence, like percentage wise, or just I don't know, like how comfortable you feel, just especially because like again, I'm surprised New York is just so far behind in Cleveland in terms of just like winning the conference next year in terms of just betting odds.
Yeah, I feel like the Knicks are still trying to shake off the stink of the last 20 years or so, I feel like. But I mean, I guess it's not unreasonable too to think like, I mean, they sort of 2 years ago, or I guess if you call it 3 seasons ago now at this point, because we're about to start another season, in the COVID season, 20 to 21, when they made the playoffs and they were the surprise 4 seed, and then it sort of had a similar thing happen to what Cleveland did with the Knicks, where they just got like completely run off the floor by Atlanta and all that stuff. But there was so much optimism going into that next season that then it was like a huge letdown when things didn't work out that way. Then obviously they're so good this past year. I think there's just a lot of hesitancy to trust them. And I wouldn't totally blame like odds makers for that. The Knicks have not strung together 2 good seasons in a row in 25 years. Like it's been a long time. You know, every time they find a small bit of success, they have at least a 1-year respite before they're back again. You could say the Melo era maybe was the exception to that, but most of those years they were like a 7 seed. You know, I wouldn't really call that like consistent high level success given the amount of like money and everything that they were putting into those teams. So I think that's maybe where some of the pessimism comes from. That said, if I was going to put like a percentage on them making an Eastern Conference Finals in the next 3 years, I would probably say about 75% too, which means one of us is probably wrong because I feel like one of them would have to beat the other. I think we're in pretty good agreement here. Like, I think that the Bucks are going to be in that mix for as long as Giannis and Dame are there, because I think Dame's game is going to age very gracefully, as it already is. Giannis is still not close to being like out of his prime yet, so they're going to be a force for a while. Boston is always going to be a real power there as long as they're able to keep their core together for the next few years. So, you know, it just kind of comes down to like, can one of the Knicks or Cavs break through one of those years and make the Eastern Conference Finals? I think they could. From my perspective with the Knicks, like, I just think they have such a good core set up with the young players, like you mentioned, that they can both bet on internal development, but also it seems like they're going to have all these guys signed to pretty reasonable contracts that can easily be sort of puzzle pieced together to level up and get a bigger star if they want to, combined with some draft picks. And if like Emmanuel quickly comes in this year and continues his upward development curve, if RJ brings in some of the stuff that he was doing, you know, in international play, if Mitchell Robinson continues being as dominant as he's been, like on the glass and, you know, just getting better at the things that he's already good at. And then to say nothing of Quentin Grimes, who's awesome. Deuce McBride, who hasn't really had a shot yet, but like definitely has defensive chops that could work in the NBA. Like, there's so many good players that could potentially be, if not the cornerstone, at least like piece 1 of 2 in a trade along with one of their teammates to get like a big star, along with some draft capital going out too. So I think it's more hinging on that. I do think that the Knicks eventually are going to have to look to make that move and get that bigger fish. And when they do that, it just has to be the right move at the right time and keep enough depth on hand, sort of like what the Bucks just did, where they have enough good depth to still be a great team. That's basically what the Knicks are going to have to do. And obviously play their cards right as far as salaries and stuff go as well. But as of right now, I think they've done such a good job with that and really just set themselves up well to do basically whatever they want to do, whether it's ride internal development or seek, a bigger star at some point.
Yeah, and I think that's just the kind of beautiful thing of how New York's navigated this. Like that's the maybe the reputation the Knicks have, where they maybe rush to the finish line to try and build out their team, and maybe they see a star that's attainable or available that's either past their prime, or maybe they have to just sell the entire farm for. And like that's just kind of been the issue. And the Knicks have been incredibly patient. They've been patient and pragmatic as well. Like you have Jalen Brunson, you have Julius Randle, like you said, you have IQ, you have Josh Hart, you have Dante DiVincenzo, you have Jalen Brunson, Emmanuel Quickley. Like you have so many just wonderful players. And like I think that's one of the key things the Knicks had over Cleveland, especially in the first round, is like they had overwhelming depth where you could maybe make one guy in New York uncomfortable or get them into foul trouble. Then you have another guy who can just continue applying that continual pressure that Tom Thibodeau and the Knicks just kind of thrive under. And it's an interesting thing to see because, like you said, like they can continue banking on the development and growth, but there's going to become a point where they can either cash in on some of those younger players that they developed really well, or they can cash in on some of the veterans that they've acquired via trade or other moves while being patient and acquiring all these assets, and then go cash in to get a bigger name star. And like you said in the first segment, we'll talk about Donovan Mitchell, but I'm sure there's going to be other names that pop up between now and then too. Like now that Dame's off the market and presumably Giannis is off the market too, like maybe Shai Gilgeous-Alexander becomes fed up with the situation in Oklahoma City because the Thunder don't want to cash in on the like 15 million draft picks they have over the next till the heat death of the universe at this point. Or like maybe Sacramento decides to move some pieces again and kind of shake things up like they did with Halliburton. Or speaking of Halliburton, maybe the Pacers never reach their apex and like they have to kind of blow things up there too. Like there's a lot of interesting ways that the Knicks could navigate this, and they could really prime themselves nicely to go get a superstar. Whereas for Cleveland, like their move was to go get Donovan Mitchell, which was a move to go get a superstar, but now you are asset limited. And sure, you look at a team like Milwaukee, who is really scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of picks that become available via trade. Like I think the picks they used to acquire Dame just became available maybe less than a few months ago at this point. And so we'll see how both teams navigate this. But like you said, like one of us is either wrong or it's just how things break. And it is hard to predict what will happen between now and 3 seasons from now. But if Cleveland somehow avoids Milwaukee like the plague and then runs to them in the conference finals, like that's a path for them to do it. Like if they're the 3 seed and they avoid Milwaukee altogether, just heading through the Eastern Conference bracket, that's the path for them. But like if they pull Milwaukee in like the first round somehow, if they're like the 8th seed, assuming Milwaukee's the 1 seed, or if like they pull them in the second round, like that's going to be a rough outing for the Cavs. And I think that's how they see that path being a little bit more clear heading into next season, at least.
Yeah, and I feel like it's probably similar for the Knicks. I do think that the Knicks would have a really hard time defending Milwaukee. Granted, I don't think that's a Knicks problem. That's an NBA problem. That's an NBA problem. That said, like, you know, the 3-point shooting teams like that always kind of vex the Knicks. That said, like, they've done a pretty good job against Boston in the past. So, like, I do think there's a world where if the Knicks manage to make like a 3 seed and then have a date with Boston in the second round, that's probably their clearest path to getting to the conference finals, because they just, for whatever reason, have Boston's number. You know, it's a team that they always play really well and seem to be able to get the best out of their defensive matchups there, and, you know, really do a pretty good job containing Tatum and stuff like that. So we'll see how that all goes in the future. But we've danced around it enough. Let's just real quick take one final break and then come in and discuss if maybe there's a Donovan Mitchell saga 2.0 in both our futures. So we'll get to that in just a sec. All right, we're back in to talk about the thing that we've been teasing the whole show. Hopefully it kept you around this whole time, listener or watcher. But we are going to talk about Donovan Mitchell and if there could be a potential trade saga again. So, Evan, I think we've talked about this almost every time that we talk, because it's intriguing. You know what I mean? It's a guy that the Knicks have a lot of connections to, which is why everybody thought that he was going to be a Knick right now. You know, as of this time, not quite this time last year, but, you know, like last summer, all summer was basically just spent being like, all right, when it was sort of similar to like the Dame saga this year, actually, if we're being honest. Like, it was just like, come on, Woj, drop Mitchell to the Knicks already. Like, what's going on? When is this going to happen? it was like all summer this year being like, come on, drop Dame to the Heat already. When's it? And then boom, Cavs come out of nowhere. They trade for Donovan Mitchell. But like more so than Damian Lillard with the Miami Heat, the Knicks have all these other connections. You know, Donovan Mitchell's dad has worked for the Mets for like forever. He grew up in the New York area. He clearly has a pretty deep emotional connection to the area, and comes here a lot during the summer, like for baseball and, you know, just kind of taking in the city all the time. So there's like definitely still a connection there, which is probably what has led to these rumors that he's already sort of planting seeds that he's not going to sign an extension with Cleveland and might look to end his tenure there, and, you know, and potentially leave as a free agent or, you know, otherwise, which would probably just mean being like, guys, trade me now or else I'll leave for the Knicks or otherwise in free agency, but like trade me to the Knicks now and then I'll extend with them. How do you feel about that though? Like what's kind of the vibe check right now as we get towards the season here?
I mean, I'm not necessarily surprised that, I mean, Brian Windhorst is the most plugged in NBA insider, and he's the one who definitely made people pay attention to Donovan Mitchell and the Jazz just blowing up everything. But I'm not surprised that it's been put into ether that Mitchell isn't going to sign an extension. Chris Manning, my co-host, and I talked about that, like how neither of us are really surprised because financially it doesn't make much sense. And if you're Mitchell, you want to maintain as much flexibility as possible heading into what could be a much more lucrative opportunity for you. And also, you don't want to landlock yourself to a situation where your heart may not be fully in it. Cause like you said, like, and Mitchell said as well, the expectation was for him to be with the Knicks heading into last season. And we were all a little surprised when he was holding up a Cavaliers jersey instead, when he was being introduced to the media in downtown Cleveland. But more than that, like, it's just interesting to think about what could happen long term, because like you said, like, there could be a very real possibility where the Cavs just decide like, hey, or Mitchell comes to him and says like, hey, I have no intention to sign an extension with you guys. And then after that, like, you just look at your options and say, okay, do we trade him now or do we ride this out and wait to see what happens? Because he technically has 3 years in total, last year being a player option in his contract. So you have 2 years to play with, and the conversation and the calculus changes a lot heading into this upcoming offseason. So after this season. So you have to consider your options there and see what you can or cannot do. And if he says like, listen, I'm going to play for the Knicks, and New York's a team that keeps the powder dry, and you're able to get a semi-similar return to what the Blazers got for Dame, because on paper it may seem a little underwhelming, even though you did get Drew Holiday, which will result in more assets for you long term. And then DeAndre Ayton does have his limitations as like a player in terms of skill set, but like, he's young enough and will make Scoot Henderson's transition to the NBA better. And I think that's the weird spot for the Cavs, where they have a superstar player who may not be fully committed to the idea of being here long term, but they're not rebuilding either. Like, they are still trying to contend. They're still trying to remain viable by Mobley and Garland. And I think this Cavs front office historically has been super aggressive when it comes to building this team. And they've been very patient and pragmatic when it comes to that approach, is on top of being aggressive. So if it's by all indications, Mitchell doesn't want to stay here, and he's human, his heart and decision could change between now and then, or maybe the Cavs are more comfortable paying him the money they want to pay him. The conversation could change, but he's just like, listen, I want to be with the Knicks. I want to be with the Heat. I want to be with a team that, a team that isn't Cleveland. Yeah, you explore that conversation, but it's not a conversation for now. You try to figure out how can we convince Donovan Mitchell to sign on the dotted line. And Kobe Altman kind of said that in his exit interview. He's like, he's done a lot for us to prove that, like, yeah, he's a guy we want to commit to long term. But more than that, like, Donovan Mitchell now needs to be convinced by the Cavs, like, yeah, I can win this team, and this is the team I want to build the rest of my legacy and career with.
Yeah, I think from a Knicks perspective, as far as potentially opening themselves up to like a Mitchell Saga 2.0, it's an interesting thing to look at from the Knicks perspective, because it's like, this sounds so like elitist, but I almost wonder if they look now and are like, we got bigger fish to fry. You know what I mean? Like,
it's
Mitchell,
not a wrong thing to think though.
Yeah. Like, it's just like, do they look at it now versus last offseason when they were obviously ready to go after him? Do they look at it now and say, does getting Donovan Mitchell and replacing, let's say it costs them quickly and Grimes or something, like quickly Grimes and picks, like if that's like roughly the return they have to give up. If it costs them that, do they look at that and say, okay, we replace those two with Donovan Mitchell? Does Jalen Brunson, Donovan Mitchell, RJ Barrett, Julius Randle, Mitchell Robinson, is that starting five potentially a championship starting five? And if so, is it worth making this move? Because I do think
solid.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people will probably laugh, and because people still, again, have these preconceived notions about the Knicks, like, oh, like the Knicks would turn down getting a superstar, blah blah blah. Like, oh, how pompous! What have you guys won? But they're clearly primed for something, and whether they seize that or not is a whole thing. Like, that's what we're gonna have to see. But I don't think it's unreasonable to say that they could be one big move away from actually being a legitimate contender, because I really think that Brunson, I've said this before, like my sort of semi-hot take on Brunson is that I don't necessarily know that he would be the best player overall on a championship team, but I do think that he is a championship winning scorer. Like he can be your number one option on offense for a championship team. Like he is that good. The Heat series totally sold me on that this year, because he essentially had to go out there, and it was like playing 1-on-5 at various points, because nobody on the team was confident enough to shoot. Even when he was dishing it to guys that could at least space the floor, like Grimes, none of them could hit shots consistently. And it was just like Brunson having to go out there and score like 36 points every night. And he did it. And it just by sheer force of will and like pivots in the post and, up and unders and dribble moves and step back threes, like he has one of the most complete bags, I think, in the NBA right now, as far as creating shots. So as long as you can build a proper defensive team around him and get shooters around him and, just kind of keep building the team in a productive way, I think you could potentially end up with a championship caliber team if you make the right move when it's time to make the move. So like, as far as if I think Mitchell could be that guy, maybe. Like I do really think I think Mitchell would have to sort of recommit to defense. Like, I just feel like that was one of his calling cards, like early in his career. And I think he's still all right on that end, but I just think he would have to like go back to being his early career self, maybe at the expense of having as much usage as he does, or as he did, especially in Utah. Not quite as bad with Cleveland now that he has Garland as like a foil, but have a similar dynamic to that. But like, he would really have to step it up, because if it's him and Brunson, he's going to have to be the guy guarding the other team's best guard every night, because Brunson can keep up with someone, but he can't. He just does his best. You know what I mean? Like, he has size limitations defensively. He's always he's not going to be like a huge negative, but he's usually going to be like a little bit of a negative, but he more than makes up for it by being a huge positive on offense. So it'll be intriguing to see, but there's certainly, I think if Mitchell hits the market again, for sure the Knicks will be first in line to call. Like, they're going to be like, well, let's try this again. What do you guys want? Can we do this for similar to what we were offering Utah a couple years ago, or maybe a little less because more time has passed and there's less time on his contract. The leverage situation has changed a little bit. I guess we'll have to see how it goes, but it's certainly something that intrigues me and that I think could happen.
No, I agree with you. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what a team like New York does, or maybe Miami, maybe like they offer Tyler Herro and 2 first-round picks, and the Cavs are kind of willing to bite the bullet on that situation and get something of quote-unquote value back. And at least Herro's a guy that fits in nicely next to Mobley and Garland and fits in timeline-wise as well, and does have that playoff pedigree to him too. But before we head out of here, like, I think another name that could be entering the ether if they flame out again, and they have a reputation of doing this, especially in the second round, but let's say Joel Embiid is unhappy in Philly. Do you think the Knicks would gun harder for him, or will they stay the course and go Mitchell first? Or like, will they make Mitchell a priority over Embiid, or like Embiid, would they trip over themselves and say, okay, Don, it's nice knowing you, but enjoy Cleveland, Miami, or wherever else. We're going to go big man hunting.
It's interesting because it's like first off, it's hilarious to think of a scenario where like those two would just like time their announcements like the exact same time and be like, by the way, I want to trade. And they're like rushing it to like Woj or Shams and just be like, who wants this one? Who wants the trade request? But if they, in theory, both hit the market at the exact same time, I think the Knicks in a vacuum like most teams, would probably go for Embiid first because he's the MVP caliber player. He's very versatile. Like, he's good on both ends in theory. Like, I think, maybe on defense he's not. I think on defense he's usually pretty freaking impactful, especially considering the load that he takes on offense. But I just think it would ultimately come down to cost for the Knicks, and I think that's always been the thing for them. And all these, with all the various stars, especially Mitchell, was the main like sort of litmus test for this. It's always going to come down to cost. Like, the Knicks clearly set a firm expectation of what they think a deal is going to be in their head, and then say, meet our price, like, be good with this. Maybe we'll leave the smallest bit of wiggle room, but you're not going to get much more than what we're offering, like, out of us. You're not going to be able to just like keep calling back and being like, well, what about this? Well, what about that? Well, what about this? What about that? And it's probably a lesson that Leon Rose learned back when he was Carmelo's agent, because that was classic Knicks, where it was like, they had a very clear situation where a star wanted to come to them, and yet then just kept continually getting asked to put more and more and more and more into a trade package, and just kept acquiescing and acquiescing and acquiescing, to the point that then they gave up like their entire team, and it hamstrung them for years to where they couldn't build a proper team around this guy that they traded for. So, I think that's what it'll ultimately come down to. And for that reason, I think that there's a very good chance that they would maybe zero in more on Mitchell if they thought that Mitchell could be had for like roughly the same trade package as what Dame just got. So let's just say it would be different because they wouldn't be trading a vet. I don't think, like, they would be trading like, let's say it was like Quickly and Grimes, or Quickly and RJ, or something like that. Or any combination of those guys plus some picks, like two, let's say like 2 protected picks, 1 unprotected pick, and like 1 swap or something like that. Then I think that would be something where they'd be like, yeah, all right, we still are going to have a bunch of picks left after this. We're still going to have tradable contracts after this. We're not going to be super over the cap or anything. Like, I think this is a good deal for us, and a better deal than trading like all 3 of their top young players plus Mitchell Robinson or something, plus like 5 first-round picks for Joel Embiid. I think that they would look at that and say, that's too much. Like, we're not going to compete then. And we don't want that. We don't want to have a skeleton crew and 3 all-stars. So because they've clearly very, very much valued depth under the Leon Rose regime. So yeah, I think maybe Mitchell would be the guy that they would kind of zero in on. But
that's an interesting take. But you made a valid enough argument. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see the future of these 2 teams, especially now with our new Milwaukee Overlords running the NBA.
Yeah, the Milwaukee Overlords certainly are going to make life not very fun for us going forward. All right, I did this the last preview show I did with John Corrales from the Celtics. Knicks and Cavs face each other 3 times this year, twice in Cleveland, once in New York. What do you think the season series ends at?
I think it goes 1-2 New York, with New York getting that Halloween game, but then the Cavs winning the second of a back-to-back in New York on November 1st, but then New York just punks them again at the end of the regular season, and then there's doubt circulating this team just because I just think the Knicks somehow, some way still have the Cavs number.
I'm gonna also say 2-1 Knicks. I think it ends up 2-1 Knicks. But I will say I think the one game they lose, they get embarrassed. Like, I don't know why. I don't know. Maybe Mitchell just goes off for like 45 points or something, but we just got this inkling. Maybe we can revisit this, but I got this feeling in my bones that the Knicks will get annihilated by the Cavs in one of those games, and it'll get talked about for like 3 days afterwards of like, oh my God, are the Cavs back? Do they have the Knicks number now? Not
to really amplify it.
Oh, that would actually be kind of hilarious if the Knicks won both games in Cleveland. But the Knicks are traditionally a great road team and not so great of a home team. So it kind of tracks. Anyway, Evan, this is great, dude. This is, man, we always seem to just go like 40 minutes and we plan on going like 30. So thanks so much for chit-chatting with me.
Of course.
Like, we've been saying all offseason, but like these 2 teams, I feel like are going to be kind of linked for a bit. So this probably won't be the last we see of each other, even throughout this season and maybe leading up to a playoff matchup again. I guess we'll see how that all goes. But for now, I think this is a really interesting discussion on where both teams are at.
Yeah, I know. I absolutely agree. really curious to see where the Knicks go. I think our conversations have certainly juiced my interest in them quite a bit. And I mean, I love New York to begin with. It's such a great city. And just like the Knicks are such a fascinating team just because like the way they built to me has been very attractive in terms of team building and just the process they followed, especially because they're such a major market. So yeah, I'm excited to see how linked at the hip these two organizations are together going forward. And things could really dramatically change, especially if Donovan Mitchell wants to go back home permanently.
I guess we'll see. Only time will tell. But until then, thank you all for listening. And thanks for listening to this preview. Gavin and I are still probably going to deliver a few more of these prior to training camp and the season getting even closer. So once we start getting flooded with Knicks news, then we'll be back to just the Knicks all the time. But I'm sure it's the same thing on the Cavs side as well. But for everybody listening on both feeds, thank you all for listening. And we'll talk to y'all soon, everybody. Peace out.